So thank you everybody for joining us for this virtual town hall meeting for the Black community. My name is Ralston King. I'm the City Councilor for Rideau Rockcliffe Ward 13, and I'm happy to welcome everybody here. My Equity and Diversity Liaison, Sophia Jacob, is also on this call, and she will actually be undertaking some of the introductions. So I will now turn it over to Sophia.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sophia Jacob, and I'm the Equity and Diversity Liaison with the Office of Councillor Ralston King. On behalf of the Councillor's Office, we would like to thank you all for joining us on the call, and we welcome the folks who are joining us via Facebook, as this call is being simultaneously streamed on both platforms. The Councillor will be sharing important information and updates. This call is also to hear the community's concerns and provide feedback on issues that matter to Ottawa's ACB communities. We would like to recognize that Ottawa is located on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation and extend our respect to all First Nation, Inuit, and Métis people for their valuable past and present contributions to this land. We also recognize the continent of Africa as the cradle of humanity. We extend our respect to all peoples who identify as African, Caribbean, and Black, and the contributions they have made to the development of human civilization. We recognize that we are in the middle of the UN Decade for People of African Descent. Under the themes of recognition, justice, and development, we take this opportunity to reflect on our current conditions in this country and continue to work with our allies towards making long-term improvements to the lives of our diverse peoples on this shared land. So just quickly, everyone, some meeting call guidelines. We kindly ask that there are no interruption when others are speaking, and that you please hold all of your questions. There will be an opportunity to provide comment, and we'll also be having some time for Q&A. We are asking everyone who is on the call and mostly through the Zoom platform, to please put your devices on mute. If you are in the Zoom application, the mute button is at the bottom of your screens. And if you have called in by phone, we are asking that you place your phone on mute. The reason for this is that when we're on Zoom, it picks up the slightest background noises and any movement that you make. So just to respect everybody on the call, we ask everybody to put their phone on mute so we can respond accordingly and hear everyone. If you have another call coming in and you are choosing to answer the call, we kindly ask that you leave the conference call and not put this one on hold. Again, we'll hear a beeping signal and that'll interrupt the call as well. When it comes time to give a comment or when we open the conversation for Q&A, we ask that folks raise their hand. To do this, you just have to click on your name and it should give you the option to raise your hand. And then you'll have your turn. Once you've had your turn, we'll just ask you to click on it again and just lower your hand. If you don't have this function on your device, you can text me at my number, which I'll leave it in the chat. But my number is 613-282-2922. Just let me know that you're on the call and that you'd like to ask a question. If you choose to not speak, but you'd still like to ask a question later on, leave it in the chat box, or you can just email me and I'll give out my email in the chat, and as well, I'll mention it here. If you have any Ward 13, which is Rideau Rockcliffe specific questions, please contact the office by email at rideaurockcliffeward@ottawa.ca or call the office at 613-580-2483. We won't be addressing any concerns about the ward on this specific call. Lastly, this is a Black-led, Black-focused, and it's designed for Ottawa's ACB communities to provide feedback, give information, and updates. It is a conversation to hear your thoughts and concerns. So again, I'm going to leave my stuff in the chat, but my email, if you want to address anything about the ACB community or you'd like to address something with me, it's sophia.jacob@rideau-rockcliffe.ca. I'll be leaving all the information in the chat. Now I'm going to pass things back to the counselor to give a statement as well as open the conversation up to COVID-19 with updates and information. Ralston?
Well, thank you very much, Sophia. You do a wonderful job in terms of bringing the community together. And Sophia is really tremendously responsible for this virtual town hall, which I think is very important to ensure that our communities, racialized communities, do have a voice during this crisis. We know that this crisis is going to impact our communities in a very specific and structural way. It's impacting the entire city, our entire country, our entire society, our entire economy. But we know that we have special challenges in this society, special challenges with this economy. And so I thought it was very important for us to ensure that the concerns of the racialized communities are addressed. As we know, over the past 5 to 6 weeks, life has changed dramatically in Ottawa with the introduction of a deadly respiratory airborne illness that has no vaccine, no established course of medical treatment, and no cure. As a consequence, all levels of government are working together to keep residents safe. A key component of this effort is led by Ottawa Public Health. That agency provides public health programs and services to individuals and communities while advocating for public policies that make our city and its residents healthier. OPH is the agency that leads efforts against outbreaks in our community, including COVID-19. The agency is responsible for implementing outbreak control measures to control and prevent further transmission of infections and thereby reducing the length and impact of an outbreak. Outbreak control measures undertaken by OPH are evidence-based and are based on best practices in accordance with guidance from the Ontario Provincial Infectious Diseases Advisory Committee and Ontario's Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care. As a consequence, OPH is the best source of quality data about the coronavirus. OPH has taken the lead to ensure that we work to slow the spread of COVID-19 by making a conscious effort. So this is very important, a conscious effort to keep physical distance between one another. This includes avoiding non-essential gatherings, avoiding common greetings, unfortunately, such as handshakes, which is a real downer for a politician, as you can imagine, avoiding crowded places, limiting contact with people at high risk, like older adults and those in poor health, and keeping a distance of at least 2 arms length or approximately 2 meters from one another. And most importantly, staying at home if you can. If your work actually permits you to stay at home, obviously you want to do that. With the exception for shopping, of course, for groceries, securing medication, or getting exercise. Due to the fact that misinformation has circulated in our community in a wide way, and there has been a lack of quality information circulated to the African, Caribbean, and Black communities around these issues at the beginning of this crisis, my office has taken action to ensure that OPH circulates culturally sensitive information. This is why on Thursday, my office, in conjunction with Ottawa Public Health, ACAO, African Canadian Association of Ottawa, Somerset West Community Health Center, Refugee 613, the Canadian of African Descent Health Organizations and researchers from the University of Ottawa actually held a virtual session on the health impact of COVID-19 on Black communities, which provided high quality information. This is very important. If you are concerned about your personal health and seek information, and you're seeking information, make sure you go to OPH's website or you call Ontario Telehealth at 1-866-797-0000. You can also undertake a symptom assessment for COVID online at the Ontario government's website. And mental health support is also available from the Distress Center of Ottawa at 613-238-3311. At council, because I was concerned about the spread of misinformation and ensuring that we get quality information to the Black community, because of course, We're residents here and we're taxpayers, so we should be getting access to that information. I asked at our second meeting during this emergency, at the second council meeting during this emergency, I asked our chief medical officer what further actions are being taken to protect the health of both racialized and Indigenous people. OPH eventually provided a comprehensive response to my question, noting that firstly, a Facebook Live event was organized for Arabic communities about COVID-19, and a second Facebook Live event is being planned on mental health and COVID-19 for the Arabic communities. That collaborations with the Somali Center for Family Services have been undertaken to provide COVID-19 messages, which are currently being scoped. And in mid-April, OPH brought together partners from Somerset West CHC, from the Community Health Center, Refugee 613, OLIP, and my staff from my office to plan a series of Facebook Live events related to COVID-19 for the Black community around mental health, around enforcement, around violence against women. And obviously the first meeting, as I had referred to before, that we had on Thursday, really looked at the general issues around COVID-19, the general health issues. The OPH also noted that they actually did run a public health campaign on Chin Radio from April 2nd to April 15th, and that they continue to develop further public service announcements around multi-generational households and self-isolation. OPH is also developing videos in Arabic and Somali on physical distancing, physical isolation, masks, and more information around the crisis. And their mental health team is developing scripts for coping with the pandemic and speaking to children and youth about the pandemic. Ottawa Public Health is also partnering with different liaisons, and so they're partnering with the Indigenous Health Liaison and the Ottawa Newcomer Health Center to adopt and create messages. And OPH will always be continuously reaching out to organizations that support older adults to determine their information needs, resources, and delivery methods that will be adapted as the crisis goes on and as response goes on. So it's very important to know that OPH is very active. We're going to ensure that we go back and forth with OPH on those issues. We're also doing that on behalf of Indigenous people as well. So ensuring that resources for First Nations, Inuit, and Métis specific resources are developed, along with resources that are developed for people of African descent, so that we can have culturally relevant material that is aimed towards us, and that frankly addresses some of the challenges that I saw earlier in the crisis around some misinformation and disinformation and a lack of information that was emerging at the beginning of the crisis. So we continue to work with OPH on those issues, and I'll leave it there. We're happy to answer some questions. I know that there have been a few that might have come in.
If folks who would like to ask a question or make a comment, please raise your hand. We're looking at the room now for any raised hands. If there's no comment or question, we'll go on to the next point in our agenda. So does anybody have a comment or question? And I haven't received any texts, so.
Oh, I think Robin is raising his hand.
Okay, yeah, Robin, go ahead.
Hey, Ralston.
Hey.
Thanks for organizing this. Is Ottawa Public Health or any city agency collecting race-based data on COVID-19 impacts?
That's a great question. They will be. They have asked, and we are going to be making a request. So I'm actually going to be writing a letter today. They have responded and said that they see the efficacy in that. Of course, it's very important for us to ensure that we are doing that. But our office will make an official request. So either after this call or on Sunday, I'm actually going to be writing a letter to the associate director of associate medical, director of health, to ask that be done. You're absolutely right. That's an important consideration, especially in light of observing what's going on south of the border with the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on people of African descent, whether that's because of health predispositions or because of a disproportionate amount of people working in essential services. So I'm concerned about that, and we can only make good decisions based on evidence. So we will be making that request, but my understanding is that OPH is actually moving in that direction.
So, Ross, we have a question from Mandy. Where can we get access to Somali information about COVID-19? Which organization is taking the lead?
So I believe it's the Somali Center that's taking the lead in helping create that information for OPH. The major resource for OPH information is the OPH website. So they are asking people to always go there. And there are multilingual resources that are going to emerge there. There's already a page where they have multilingual resources, and those resources will only grow. So we have asked them to do that. I've been doing a little bit of back and forth with Keith Eglai, who is a city councilor and also the chair of the board of health. And he is definitely committed to ensuring that there are materials made available that are multilingual. We've even been pushing for multilingual materials in parks. I think what they've decided to do there is to create infographics that are relatively generic, so people can understand that. But please consult. Once those materials are created, the materials will be available at Ottawa Public Health's website.
Awesome. Elaine had her hand up. Elaine, if you'd like to ask a question, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Hi, Elaine.
Hi, Rolston. I just wanted to follow up on Robin's question. Thank you for writing that letter, but I think one of the important issue is that we need to be also consulted when data is being collected about our community. So if you can really express that in your letter, I think we have that movement, nothing about us without us. So before they start collecting data, I think the community needs to be consulted so we know what they're collecting, why they're collecting, how they're collecting, all that sort of stuff.
That's an excellent point, and I'm happy to relay that in my letter to ensure that there is community input before data is before there's an approach to collecting that data. I think that is important, and I am a big believer in an open data or open government type of approach. So if that data is created, it would be my hope, minus any privacy concerns, that data, the data can be anonymized or what have you, that it is shared. So that would be an area that we would focus on. And that letter was requested for Monday, so it will be something that we will be working on forthwith.
We have time for one more COVID-related question. If anybody would like to comment or ask a question, this is the time. Okay, let me just run over to the chat. I believe I see something. It is from Mandy. There was an article out about police access to individuals who have tested for COVID-19. Is this true? How do we ensure this information will be protected?
Yeah, I'm not certain about that. I think I saw that. The reality is that police service operations are governed by the Police Services Act. So as a counselor, I don't, for good reason, have control over the actions of the law enforcement agency. There is civilian oversight. So those are questions though that we can ask at Police Services Board for clarification, or that I can pose to the chair of Police Services Board. So we might do that as a written inquiry, because things are different around the city. The city has declared a state of emergency, and it is just starting to look at restarting some of its committees. We've been meeting virtually, so legislation at Queen's Park had to be changed in order for that to happen. The directive under these emergency measures is that primarily there won't be the introduction of major public policy planks or discussions right now. Right now, we're really focused on mandatory items and statutory items in front of committees. However, there is going to be a meeting of Police Services Board on Monday. And it is still meeting, and it is still taking inquiries from the public. So I have no problem, relaying that inquiry for clarification through Police Services Board.
Norma, you have your hand up, followed by Andrea. Norma, go ahead.
Would be
Norma?
fine.
Oh, okay.
Nice.
Okay.
to take myself off of mute. Hi, Ralston. How are
Hello.
you?
Good.
I was at our MP, Greg Fergus's virtual conference yesterday, and I was fortunate to be one of the speakers. One of the questions that was put to me was, again, about the collection of COVID data for our folks. And I know Toronto is already starting to do this.
Yeah.
Ralston, are you considering partnering, or the OPH considering partnering with the Toronto folks on this?
Well, I know that Toronto is leading. Our hope is that we'll be seconds, and we are going to write a letter. My office and I myself am going to write a letter to formally request that OPH do collect data and actually consult with community as they do that. Obviously, I would hope that they would consult with other public health agencies if they're best practices. There will be one in Toronto, so it would be my hope that they would consult with Toronto when they do that. Of course, that's the purview of Ottawa Public Health, because they're professionals. We are dependent upon their professional advice and their professional practice. But we definitely will ask them to collect data to ensure that they consult with the community before they really put in that approach, the approach that they're going to take to do that. We also want to, I would like to see that data made open as long as it doesn't breach any privacy guidelines or laws or regulations. So ensuring that data is anonymized but is accessible as well, so that we get a sense of what is being collected, and ensuring that transparency, so that public health decisions that are going to be made in terms of this crisis have that scrutiny. We ensure that they're evidence-based, and we ensure that we really collect data to understand the impacts of what's happening. So it's my intent to submit a letter to Ottawa Public Health requesting that on Monday, and hopefully they will move in that direction. My understanding is that they are entertaining moving in that direction, but we want to give formal notice, at least from the elected officials level, that that is something that we are seeing the community calling for.
Okay. The other point I'd like to make is, as the National Vice President at PIPS, I'm also chair of our Science Advisory Committee for the Institute. And so I'd like to be linked in on this data collection provincially. And I would also encourage you to link in federally, especially with Stats Canada. Yesterday, they gave a presentation on procurement and data collection at the conference. And of course, a lot of because it was the, the Black focused conference, the questions were on what are you doing to disaggregate the data. They didn't give any definitive answers, but said this is something they'd like to do. So perhaps they need a bit of a push and maybe would be encouraged by hooking on to something that's already being done at the provincial level.
Yes. And that's definitely one of the asks I'll make, best practices, and ensuring that community groups and organizations like yourself are reached out to in terms of the creation of that data collection and the modeling that they will undertake.
We have another question by Andrea. Andrea, if you could go ahead, and then we'll have a final question from Erica. Andrea?
Hi, thank you, Councillor King, for convening this activity. My question is, how is the City of Ottawa ensuring that the broader Black community and groups are included in these conversations with respect to COVID, particularly also around like a lot of our community who are frontline workers, and what is being done to protect them in this other than communication?
Yeah, so one of the things that we have been doing from the start, and I have been driving those questions, have been around personal protective equipment, ensuring that that is provided not just to frontline staff in our hospitals, but also examining how that can be provided to private healthcare providers. So actually, even before people went into self-isolation, when the city had its first news conference about these challenges and invited counselors to ask questions, those were the first questions that I was asking, because I'm in contact with owners of nursing home facilities, as well as doctors who work in palliative care facilities. And they were worried about this crisis maybe about 2 weeks before, there had been a request by the government for people to stay at home. So we've been very active on that file, and the way that we've been responding is through advocacy. So I had asked the questions of Dr. Vera Etches, like I said, at that Friday news conference before the Monday when people went into lockdown. We've been continuously asking those questions. I also meet on a regular basis with the other elected officials in Ottawa-Vanier, which is my federal district. So we have been able to provide a long list of requests. Those are part of the requests. What are we doing around this equipment? How are we providing supports to people? And those requests, obviously at the city level, there's only so much that we can do because we have control over a public health agency. But as we know, health is a responsibility primarily of the province, and it's also a federal responsibility in terms of funding. So we have been relaying those requests directly to our elected officials in the senior orders of government. They have been very responsive. So this is the good news, really. They have been massively responsive. In fact, Mona Fortier, who also is Associate Minister of Finance, has asked for all of our requests. Her big focus was on definitely testing and making sure that there is a lot of equipment throughout the entire healthcare chain. So we've been making, as a city councilor, I've been meeting with those other elected officials on a weekly basis and forwarding the needs of our constituents forward. And that has been somewhat successful. We all spoke with a combined voice, as example, around, and this is a different issue, around community gardens. So I wrote a letter with Sean Menard. I know that Councillor Eagle, who's the chair of the health board, also sent out a note. We've had a lot of people, Teresa Kavanaugh also saying that we needed to have community gardens looked at as essential services because of the number of people who are dependent upon them, vulnerable people. And then this morning, they actually did announce that they would be making changes to their emergency measure orders. So the most important thing is, if you have those issues, please forward them to my office, because I do relay them to the senior levels, and they are listening. As example, Mona Forte says, Ralston, I'm interested in what the constituents are saying, and that's across the board. So it's not just geographic. Obviously, geographic is important, but cultural is important as well. And she is willing to take those concerns to finance officials, because she's Associate Minister of Finance, and to cabinet. So we've seen some success, and so we will continue to ask those questions.
Fantastic. Erica has a question, and then we're going to be moving on to the next topic. Erica?
Okay. And Erica, you have to unmute. So I'm going to just unmute you. There you go. You should be unmuted.
Okay. I feel no wonder they don't want to do virtual parliaments. So my question has to do with the data on essential workers. I think that's an important piece that we're not talking about. And I'm pretty sure that it's racialized, and I'm pretty sure that it's gendered. But I'm on, data is both, good and bad. Data is really good for surveillance programs, but it's also really good at figuring out who is most impacted by certain things. And I think that for the city or public health to collect data, they have to have a strategy. They have to have a strategy determining not only what they're going to do with it, but how they're going to house it. And not only how they're going to house it, who has access to it? Will we have access to our data? Those types of questions are the questions that I'm thinking about right now. And I really do think the data going forward needs to be a transparent process. If not, there's going to be a lot of distrust, or is it mistrust? Anyway, all this to say that that's my spiel. And so I guess my question is, do public health officials have an official data strategy? And number two, do they have an accountability piece, and what is that? And just to reiterate that the essential workers, the people who are putting their bodies on the line for us, we need to know who they are so that we can better support them.
Absolutely. I agree with you across the board. Since we don't have a mechanism in place for data yet, I can't say that we have a strategy. I mean, we will be, like I said, writing a letter and asking them, supporting the idea of the collection of data, ensuring that there's a proper strategy put in place, ensuring that community is consulted, all those things, and ensuring that there's openness in terms of the data that's collected, and accessibility so that there can be accountability. So because it's not in place yet, but it's being proposed, we want to provide some guidance to that, and that's what that letter that I'll be writing will do. It will provide advice to the public health agency. We note that they are an independent agency and they're run by professionals, and it's very important that we have evidence-based guidance for government action. We're seeing the challenges around that south of the border. I think that we don't have those challenges as much in Canada, and it's very important that we have that independent agency so that the public health officials are making the decisions and are making the recommendations, and then the politicians, the elected officials, can make informed decisions. But you're absolutely right. I think that has to be done in a transparent, accountable way, and that's what I'll be pushing for.
Fantastic. Thank you, Councillor, for that update. We're going to be moving on to the Anti-Racism Secretariat and any updates or latest information on what's happening with that position. Ralston?
Yes, absolutely. So as we know, on November 6, 2019, the creation of the proposed city's Anti-Racism Secretariat was passed. during the 2020 city budget. So I'm really ecstatic about that. I think that that was a huge win for the community, and that was community driven. That was the most important thing. As everybody knows, I came into office just barely a year ago on April 16th of last year. And there was so much elation in our community, the first Black elected official. And of course, literally 3 or 4 weeks later, there was a lot of deflation. We actually had a racial graffiti incident that occurred in Ward 13, that occurred in my ward. And the call from the community was for the establishment of a secretariat, because we know there's individual acts of racism, but at the city level, especially when you think about it constitutionally, there ought not be systemic racism based off just the constitutional principles that we hold dear in Canada. So I felt that was very important. We had a lot of support, and we were able to convince colleagues over the summer, consult with community over the summer, and create a proposal and work with city staff and other city councilors to really move this idea forward and to have unanimous support for it. So the Secretariat, as we know, will target systemic racism by building an anti-racism approach into the way our city government develops policies and makes decisions. The budget that was approved was an operating budget of $100,000. And on top of that, an expected hire of 1 full-time equivalent to begin with. So the total budget line item for that was $210,000. And the competition for an anti-racism coordinator was posted earlier this year and closed February 19th. The idea behind the coordinator position was to have a staff person who would start to do the groundwork and the consultation work to establish the Secretariat, to establish the unit with proper input. So that competition has closed. While the hiring position was initially placed on hold, like all things at the beginning of the COVID crisis, the Partner and Stakeholder Initiative section of Ottawa's Community and Social Services Department does want you to know that the position will be filled over the next few weeks. This is very important because a lot of positions right now and a lot of things that are going on at the city are on hold. That's because we have a lot of challenges, obviously, with this crisis, and a lot of the staff that are working away are now primarily working on COVID response. So the city has kind of gone into a stasis as well. The other challenge that we see, which is important to consider, is the fact that with the economic challenges, there is a crunch in terms of our financial capacity. Now, we're going to be able to operate and provide essential services, but we have seen a substantive reduction in the revenue streams at the city, and that is causing a loss of approximately $1 million a day, $30 million a month. And that is going to be a challenge to the bottom line of the city. So the city is kind of working in a way that is working through these challenges, but it has committed to ensure that this hire is done. And the department will continue to work with my office on the development of the Secretariat as we go forward.
Ralston, we have a question from Marcia. She's asking how many individuals have been shortlisted, if you know that.
So I don't know that. That is a process. One of the things about the creation of the Secretariat is that it's not in my office, and that's there's a very important reason for that. And that's number one, as a member of council, I only have one employee along with the rest of council, which is our city manager. And all of those tasks are delegated, and we do not undertake or really exercise a tremendous amount of influence over the hiring processes for obvious reasons. So I have not been privy to that. I know that at the beginning of the process, people were asking from that office what we would like to see. And what we did was we sent a memo, and people on this call might remember that we did a follow-up after the creation of the Secretariat. We held a follow-up session, I think in the late fall or into winter, at Rideau Community Hub, to reiterate what the community would like to see in terms of the actions of the Secretariat and in that position, in a sense. So we did that. We reiterated these are the things that we wanted to see, but we haven't been really involved in the hiring process, and we wouldn't be involved in that. That would be actions taken by city staff or by the public service.
Is there any more questions? I don't see any hands up. If there's another question or comment, you can put your hand in the chat.
I think Betty Ann might be asking something. I see, so I will
maybe somebody's
her.
writing.
Hello.
Thanks.
It's her husband, Bob.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Oh,
okay. Ralston, kudos to you for housing or holding this virtual town hall. And congratulations also on your anniversary of your appointment. The question I have with respect to the position in the Secretariat, with respect to the positioning of the individual that would occupy that role and function, I know there was some, I believe, recommendation or thinking around the fact that the individual should not be under human resources, but rather it should report directly to the city manager in terms of accountability and credibility. What's the latest on sort of that proposal?
Sure. So, I mean, we reiterated that in the memo that we sent to the city manager and to other staff at social services, early in January. So we did that. The creation of this position, my understanding, should fall under the partner and stakeholder initiatives group of community and social services. It is a coordinator position with the aim of consulting and ensuring that there's consultation with the community and the creation of that strategy. So it is a stepping stone to get to the full establishment of the Secretariat, if you get my drift. Because the reality was, I tried to be very clear with staff that there needed to be community consultation on the action plan that would be created. So ensuring that we went to community, asked them what they wanted to see for an action plan that would be ratified by council. So that's still my expectation. My understanding is nothing has changed there. And my reading of the job description was that this coordinator position would be somebody who would work to consult with community and to also flesh out a strategy. So that's my expectation. We'll see how staff comes back once they hire. But I've been very clear about that over and over, that I want to see the initiatives that are worked on emerge directly from the community. So it's not just strictly my office or Ralston King who's providing those inputs. My hope is that they follow the best practices that were created by the anti-Black racism unit at the City of Toronto, and consult first, really enumerate all of the specifics that the community wants to see, and have those endorsed through an action plan at council that would be measurable over a year-to-year basis.
Awesome. I have a text question that came in, Ralston. Will the Secretariat be a person of color or racialized person? We've seen, they just heard you say that you don't have control of the hiring process, but they do want to ensure that it's going to be a racialized person, or preferably somebody who is Black. Can you provide some context?
That would obviously be my preference. I think that we need to have somebody who understands the community and the challenges. And I believe that in the posting there was kind of an ask for a preference for people of color and other groups. So, I think that would only make sense. But once again, that is in the purview of city staff. I do, after the numerous consultations I've had with staff, I have a sense that they would have that understanding.
Robin would like to know, where can we see the job posting? I believe it came down, but I'm not sure. Ralston, can you provide some context around where can they see the job?
Yeah, I might be able to find a copy. I mean, it's difficult because we're working from home remotely. We're not in our offices, so I know that I would have had a printout of it in my office. A printout. I'm not certain I have that electronically here, but we can definitely look into that and see. But it was publicly posted on the site, and I think Sophia's right. It probably would have been removed after the expiry of the competition submission period.
Wonderful. We're going to be moving on into the next topic, was your gun motion or the gun ban. Ralston, if you can provide a little bit of a comment on that, and then we'll take questions.
Sure. So that was a major plank of my political manifesto when I ran. As you might know, in June, I moved a motion to curb gun violence. People call it a gun ban motion, but that's very interesting because I only had a few lines asking the mayor to write to our prime minister before the election, asking for legislation that would look at banning handguns. What's interesting is that the motion was referred to Police Services Board, so it was not put up for some ideological divisive debate around council. Ultimately, I think in the wisdom of council generally, because everybody voted unanimously, they said, let's not have this divisive debate. Let's seek facts from the police service. So the board itself was referred our motion and instructed the police service to produce a report that contains an environmental scan with research and recommendations focused on measures to curb gun violence. And that report actually, because I moved that in June, they said they were going to come back for first quarter. They haven't done a bad job noting that there's a COVID-19 pandemic, a global pandemic, because that report will actually be tabled on Monday by Chief Slowly at the board. And so he will give I believe, a verbal update, and the report has also been released for review. Basically, with measurable increase in brazen gun crime in our city over the past year, and deaths of many Black youth, I say that one of the most disappointing things that I've really experienced as an elected official in my brief time in office, because I don't see it as being that long, being a year in office, I had attended two homes of Black families who had lost youth. And I mean, there's nothing more heartbreaking than seeing parents grieving for their children. So it's actually quite important. Even before I was elected, I was advocating for greater investments in our communities to ensure that we could really address the root causes of crime, which include poverty, mental health, and substance abuse. So the idea behind the motion that I moved, it wasn't just to see legislative action by senior orders of government. It was also to ask those senior orders of government for greater investments in invested communities. Overbrook is being one of them in Ward 13, in which I live, where we have issues with gun violence, with drug trade, and we don't have the concurrent investments that are necessary to address those underlying issues. So I'm excited. I had a report, I believe, in February at Police Services Board when we were all still able to meet, and they provided an interim update on what they were looking at. And the police chief was focused on seeing how they could work on the preventative piece, not just the reactive piece, but the preventative, or being proactive in the community in positive ways in conjunction with the provision of greater social services. So what we've been asking community members to do is to write in support of these types of measures, more investments in communities, to the interim chair of Police Services Board, Smallwood. So Vice Chair Smallwood, because Diane Deans unfortunately cannot chair. So we are asking community members actively to provide some input. Right now, the Police Services Board can only do that vis-a-vis written statements electronically, because it's obviously impossible for people to meet in person. As we move forward, committees and the boards are going to be looking at ways to really create some interactive opportunities for residents, maybe through technologies such as these, to participate. But right now, they have to work up towards that capacity. So my understanding is that the report that will be provided is verbal, but at this next meeting, there aren't going to be public delegations, but they will still take public comment. And what I would encourage everybody on this call to do is to write in and say that we need more investments in community social services, and we need investments that are not just strictly reactive, like police enforcement capacity. What we need instead is to ensure that our youth aren't interfacing with that criminal justice system in the first place, because they have opportunities in their neighborhoods, in their communities.
Perfect.
So,
Ralston,
I'll leave
Norma
it.
has a question.
Sure.
Norma has a question for you. Norma, go ahead, my dear. Norma, if you're on mute, you can take yourself off.
Okay, there we go.
Okay.
I was talking away and nobody was hearing me. This makes me very reflective. Very good platform for you to have campaigned on, especially in light of what's going on now. I'm Nova Scotian, and I've been tweeting, I've been Facebooking about the latest disaster. It started off with 16 people, now it's 22 victims in Nova Scotia, and the whole country, if not around the world, are mourning or affected by this whole incident. And, you know, I'm not sure, but would you say, was this, you said this Monday, Chief Slove is going to be tabling this gun legislation?
Well, it's
Was
not
that-
it's a report that is a
This
response.
report, okay.
It's a report that is a response to the motion that I tabled. I asked in June that I tabled a kind of a motion to curb gun violence. It had a few lines about writing the Prime Minister and the Premier at the time to look at banning the sales of handguns in the municipality, along with banning ammunition. But the majority of the motion also dealt with the root causes, the fact that the police service needs to ensure that they're not just looking at enforcement, but they're also looking at working closely with social services. Certain things changed between then. We had the re-election of a minority Liberal government who had decided to commit to providing municipalities with tools to ban handguns within their own jurisdiction. We don't know how that will look. It seemed like a very strange thing politically for me, from my perspective. Because I'm looking at that and going, well, you know, what happens outside of city limits? You know, it's one thing if we can ban guns within the city limits, but it's not that effective if it's just within a municipality. But we saw that change and we saw that commitment, which was interesting. So, you know, I feel that we actually were ahead of the curve. Because I that summer sat in the home of parents with a deceased child from gun violence, saying that we need action. And so I think that there has been a movement towards that. But the approach I take is very balanced. This is the other thing. I'm asking for community members to really get involved, because if you don't get involved and we only get 1 or 2 letters from you, I will guarantee that there will be 50 letters from 50 to 100 letters from the gun lobby. And I think that what they were trying to do was they were trying to make it into a really ideological issue. For me, it's not. It's a question of the community. And the community I represent, and the community having disproportionate amounts of gun crime, and controls are needed for that. And whenever I talk publicly, I said, this is a multi-tier focus. We can't talk about curbing gun violence without investments in the community, without looking at neighborhood policing that is trying to be proactive rather than reactive. So, not just trying to target everybody indiscriminately, because there isn't an understanding of the community, targeting the people who are actually engaged in crime. But like I said, the most important thing for me is the community investments, the investments in our, whether it's entrepreneurial programs or recreational programs. We need to ensure that we are putting a tremendous amount of money in communities so that youth are positively engaged. And then the other little element, like I said, the 2 lines to me was the gun ban, asking for one, because I don't really think that you can have gun control, or curb gun violence without actually legitimately looking at the prospect of gun control. So that's what's important to me. But I would like to see this as a mechanism for communities to get greater investment. So children are positively engaged, and they do not have to, get involved in the drug trade, period. And we're looking at enhancing their human potential.
Well, this is it. And, I was on the board of directors on my community association for a number of years, and they seem to always focus on the little children, the toddlers, the children who are less than 10 years old, and not propose anything for the teenagers and, young adults. And unless they're kept busy, and they have something to fill in, just as you were saying, we're always going to have a problem with this.
Programming.
The other thing that I wanted to mention was, you're doing this at this level, and I listened to the live presentation from the PM this morning and since last weekend regarding the Nova Scotia. So I'm looking at, this is an opportune time to jump on the bandwagon as to what's going on currently, to try and push this not just at your level, but at a federal level. I mean, there's nobody that wouldn't see this as making sense now with that crime in a very small town, who, the people are very friendly there. They're, it's kind of funny to say, but when I heard about this, my first reaction was, oh my God, don't tell me this is a Black person who did this. So can you imagine if one of our folks had done this? It's something that's unfortunate, but at the same time, when we have somebody who has committed a hideous crime, who is not racialized, it seems to get more attention. So why don't we jump on the attention and see what we can do to make this as effective as possible?
Well, one of the things
not just be a report, but work towards legislation.
The report leads to ultimate action. So this is why, I want people to be involved, to actually respond to the written report, to write letters of support for investments in communities. That's going to be very important. So it's something that I've been very open about. The reality is, if we don't, then they can be deluged with a tremendous amount of correspondence from the gun lobby, which has a very unsophisticated approach. It's just that these are, typically they'll argue, hey, the weapons that have been used are illegal. We're legal gun owners, and this is strictly a property rights issue. We actually are not interested in their arguments. I'm just interested really in the community investments to ensure that we have diversion, especially around gun violence and gun crime, and around the guns themselves. I think it does make sense in a city environment not to have handguns. So I think that makes eminent amount of sense, and I think that we should actually have some focus on that. The legislation obviously was proposed in the Liberals manifesto. We don't know what that will look like, especially with COVID-19 taking up the broad specter of all the work in government across the board, whether it's municipal, provincial, or federal. But at some point, I'm supposing we will see action once the COVID response starts to wind down for at least this outbreak. So I'm looking forward to that, and we'll see how that goes.
Ralston, we have another question in the comments. I'll just read it to you. Just 1 second.
Sure.
It is saying, I gotta scroll back, sorry. Will you stand for a celebration commemoration day for the Black community member that was dead by or with gun violence at City Hall?
Commemoration, sure. I mean, I know that we've had marches to City Hall, and I've attended and spoke at them against gun violence that has been wreaking havoc for the Black community. So I definitely would entertain that.
Okay. And we have another question here in the chat again. Sorry, I'm just gonna have to scroll back a bit because people wrote a lot of different things. Who should we write the letter to? That was Robin's question. Who should we write the letter to?
So the Police Services Board, Ottawa Police Services Board, has a website. The letter can be directed to the coordinator of the committee. Her email address is very prominent throughout the the Police Services Board website. And it's also the chair is Chair Smallwood. But if you look at the individual Police Services Board site, there is one point of contact, and she will be able to receive all the correspondence and forward that to the chair.
Perfect. We have a question from Elaine. Elaine, go ahead.
So I'll unmute.
Okay, perfect. And then following Elaine is going to be Prince Will, because he was been waiting for a little bit.
Sure.
Okay. So I guess my first question is, where can we get access to the report? And then a follow-up question is, as a community member, I'm going to be the first to say that I do not understand the gun violence issue in Ottawa. The media, yes, I can understand the gun violence issue in the United States when it comes to the Black community in Toronto, but I'm finding that when it comes to Ottawa, I'm not understanding, I'm not getting any data as to what is the issue, what is going on with guns and youth and Black youth in Ottawa. So how can we solve the problem when we don't have when we don't have data, we don't have any concrete information?
Yeah, I would agree with you that we need to have more concrete information. We will push for that. The approach that I'm taking, the response that I'm taking, is anecdotal, but it's in my neighborhood. And as a former president of a community association, we saw the challenges, especially around drug trade, that being impacted by gun violence, and the combination of that happening in the disproportionate amount of social housing that we have in our neighborhood. So just by looking at some of the trends, it does create some challenges. We do know that our youth, and that's pretty concrete, that we need to have resources, more community investments in under-resourced communities. So, I'm pushing for that, and I think that does impact, people's the way that they might interface with the criminal justice system. So, if we give people more opportunities to be more productive, I think it's going to be better for our communities, and that's a more productive investment in my mind. In community services and investments in entrepreneurial programs or recreational opportunities than investments in a growing, criminal justice complex. So you're right, it is anecdotal, but we do have to respond to it. When I'm at somebody's home and, you see weeping parents and they're saying that we need to have more controls and we need to have more opportunities for our youth. So much so that in the name of their deceased children, they're setting up foundations to ensure that there are investments in youth scholarships. That should be the role of government, really, to say we will address and redress these types of challenges. Ultimately, it shouldn't be up to just community members who are seeing other communities that have higher levels of investment. So as an example, and this goes into a little bit of municipal politics, but we're going to see more sports complexes in newer suburban developments because the money is there. The people who are there might be of higher income, and the structure, the municipal financing structure, allows for that. But the inner core, the urban core, with more aged infrastructure that is not being renewed as quickly, and where a lot of people, primarily from racialized communities, might live, are not seeing that type of quality investment in recreational facilities, as an example. So
Okay.
it creates an inequality. So, I mean, we're seeing these, but you're right. I think we're seeing these things, but it's not primarily, we don't have the data, but anecdotally, we're seeing a lot of the end results of this.
So Elaine has a quick follow-up question, and then we're going to take Princeville, and then we'll move on. So Elaine is asking, where are they getting the guns? Because Canada doesn't make guns. So just quickly, if you can address, where are they getting the guns?
So part of the report, and this is one of the challenges that we see, and we're reminded of by the gun lobby, is that these are illegal guns. So the challenge that they're saying is that, well, don't have a universal ban on guns, because the guns that we have the people who hold them legally have to go through a highly regulated process to hold them legally. So the report itself says that many of the guns are obtained illegally, and they do come in from the United States. And so obviously there needs to be challenges around interdiction of those weapons. However, my feeling, once again, is the focus is let's not have those guns get into the hands of our youth in the first place. We should really be focusing on providing the social programming and the opportunities for youth to be successful and to completely circumvent the criminal justice system. And that's a better use of our money, because and this is the other comparison. The data that we do have tells us that for that one person who really gets wrapped up in the criminal justice system, especially around gun crime, it's going to cost the system $1.2 million. Could you imagine if you give a fraction of that? And we know, community groups are only getting a fraction of that, the benefits that youth will get if we have those investments from the get-go to really address the root causes of the crime, and to ensure that people youth are getting adequate access to a good programming. So that's what I'm going to continue to push for, those social investments, so that we can really enhance the human potential of our youth.
Awesome. We'll take one final question from Princeville on this topic, and then we're moving on. So Princeville, you're up.
Sure.
My video is not showing. I'm not sure what's going on with my laptop. Yeah, in addition to what Ralston had said around social investment, it's a great idea. But I also wanted to say something that have worked in Halifax a bit. There's a program called Ceasefire in Halifax, which they used a public health approach to approach gun violence. So basically, they focused on the social determinants of health, and they had violent interrupters in communities or areas that had high gun violence rates. And these violent interrupters were people that actually knew those that are involved in this gun violence and would bring this information, work with police and share this information so that before somebody's gone down, they'll be the ones to give information that will help interrupt that violent activity that was going to take place. Another thing that they did, they had a program called the SEED program, a one chance program. So for those who have been involved in the crimes that have gone to jail, when they're out of jail, there's this program to help them around entrepreneurship and give them funds to start up something or help them get on their tracks so that they could have something that they will be doing that's legal. So these are some of the things. So I think it's difficult to address gun violence without looking at the social determinant of health, looking at it from a public health lens, and looking at the economic impact, because that's what drives folks into this. I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah. And thank you, Princewell. That's very important. I think that we need to have more innovation, especially around some of the social programming that is provided. So I think that that's important. The other thing in an alternative universe for me would be the reduction of our dependence upon a grant economy, where we ultimately, with the police, the formula is there. They have a permanent budget, but to ensure that we have just a few social workers or youth workers, organizations have to keep on going back to the trough. They have to keep on writing reports. They have to keep on writing grant applications. I mean, this is, to me, that's a massive challenge. And that's something, it's structural. So it's not something that I can easily address. I'd be honest about that, but it's something I think we have to think about in terms of the way that we undertake our governance. There has to be better ways of us to ensure value for money for the work that is undertaken, but ensure permanence in terms of the investments that we are putting into communities.
Thanks, Princewell, for the comment. We're going to be moving on in our topics. We're going to be going to businesses and wage subsidies. We know that businesses are really suffering at this point in time, but our Black-owned businesses are really at the mercy of this pandemic right now. Ralston, can you provide a short commentary on that, and then we'll take questions and comments.
Absolutely. Well, I'm really concerned about small business, so much so that come next week on the 29th at 1 p.m., I'll be holding a small business roundtable in conjunction with several small businesses in my community, along with our business improvement area. The challenge is multifold. I think that obviously income supports are the domain of senior levels of government. So a lot of people are contacting us about income supports, but of course, those are going to be provided through the province and through the federal government. But what we've been doing, meeting as elected officials, at least in the Ottawa Vanier riding, has been to give some very strong messaging for our constituents about the challenges that they are facing. And the wonderful thing about what's going on, I think, is that government is working hand in hand and are working in cooperation in Canada. And we have higher levels of government who are asking for our input directly from constituents. And we've been doing that. So more than 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago, some of the first weeks in the crisis, we had been hearing about the challenges that Black communities were facing. And I think that was a call that was held with MP Greg Fergus that I was on, and I would literally the next couple of days I was able to relay those concerns to our Associate Minister of Finance and said, we really have to think about this. We are going to have business accounts and wage subsidies, but we have to think about businesses that would traditionally have problems accessing capital. So Black businesses, often versus our counterparts, we have to work harder and we are subjected to a lot more challenges. So that's something I relayed. So I relayed that the challenges of the basis of salary for as a component to obtain the loans that are being offered, the $40,000 business loans. The fact that they dropped the salary requirement to $20,000, fine. But the reality is that if you are a Black barbershop or a beauty salon, you might have people working chairs on a contractual basis. So they might be getting that amount of money, but the reality is they might be being paid, in a reasonable way of salary, but the salary is not reported in the same way in the tax filing. And so those are challenges that we have clearly identified. And the fact that there needs to be fairer access to capital. So I was also having this conversation with a small business owner on Friday, actually. The reality is we have some businesses that have more of a structure that is considered more regular than the other more innovative or more precarious businesses. And those businesses are drivers of our economy. We know that small business is a massive driver, especially in Ottawa, of our economy, and they will need access to resources as well. So I've been trying to advocate, and we put in specific lines around Black businesses because I'm especially concerned, though. I border on Vanier, and I sit on the board of the Vanier BIA. I'm concerned about the large number of Vanier businesses and a number of Overbrook businesses as well that will have serious challenges around sustaining their business, around their viability, around paying rent, and they will need access like the other businesses to capital to stay afloat. So we've been pushing. My role primarily here is advocacy, because as a city, the only thing that the major tools that we've had have been tax deferral, and we have put in play those processes for both commercial property owners and residential owners, so that they have a longer period of time, I believe until October, to pay their tax, their provincial their property taxes. But those are unfortunately the primary levers that we have, and that lever has created a challenge also in terms of less money coming into the fare box at OC Transpo, along with recreational center bookings. They're creating a large hole in our budget. And I know that the mayor, in conjunction with other big city mayors, through the Federation of Municipalities, are looking at asking for a backstop for the revenue that the cities are losing. But it is important, and it is something that we are advocating for at the highest levels to ensure that there are a fair number of supports across the board for all business owners during this crisis time.
Robin, you have a question? I saw your hand up. Robin, go ahead.
Yeah, this is kind of a relating a bit back to COVID, but it relates to what we're on right now, Ross. And my question is about rent. And does the city have any power at all to help on that front? And I raise that because looking at what the government has done, how did I lose that? Yeah, it's pretty weak, right? So I'm looking at, for example, the CMHC, right, the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation. It says they've given landlords relief, and then they say we expect all landlords, especially those with to pass on the savings to tenants. Like, right? So does the city have any? Any power? I think you may answer the question, but does the city have any power at all to do this?
Unfortunately, it's a moral power. The power over rent is really a provincial responsibility. We don't have any enforcement power. We've had challenges around that. So we've had landlords I actually have a specific case which really still amuses me. It wasn't even in my ward per se, but it was in a bordering ward. So a bordering councillor asked me to write a letter of support for a restaurant owned by a racialized family, and the landlord is based in another province. And all we had the power to do was write a very compelling letters to say, do the right thing. And the blowback that I got was really amusing. But there's blowback because we were basically saying, please don't evict people during a global pandemic. Probably not the right thing to do. It's not the moral thing to do, especially when we are working hard as a city to have a buy local campaign to ensure the viability of our businesses, to really push senior levels of government to do more. So rent is going to be a definite issue, but it is on the radar. I participated on a conference call with several businesses, maybe almost 100 businesses, and the Ontario Minister for Small Business. And he's been hearing about that just like we have. And he has noted that the province is looking at other mechanisms around the legal implications around leases and things like that. But the reality is that is governed by contract law, and there's contract law in place. And we have to really be dependent, unfortunately, on some of the reasonableness of some of the people who own the properties. So that has been a challenge, and it has been something that has been worrying me, because we've heard numerous reports of commercial landlords who've not been that productive and have not been very good with the people who they lease to. But we are relaying those concerns to senior levels of government. You're right; it's an interesting scenario that they've proposed in terms of the rent programs or in engaging the landlords. But for the federal government to do that, I think that they actually moved at record speed. I was actually shocked, because that flows through the provinces, and they negotiate with all the provinces to actually put that in place in a specific way. But it is something that we have identified, but unfortunately, it is not something that the city really has much power over.
Okay, Susan, I see that you have a question. You have your hand up. Susan, go ahead. You have to unmute yourself, Susan.
Sorry, just hi, it's Suzanne, actually, from the Cultural Arts Studio. Hope you guys are well and healthy. Hi, Ralston.
Hey.
So, as you know, I'm in your ward.
Yes, you're down the street.
I can see your backyard.
Yeah.
So I have a couple issues. One is that even though my business is in Ontario, I live in Quebec, and I need to get to my business to be able to get my tax papers, to be able to continue my business working from home. The interprovincial rules that I'm not an essential business does not allow me to cross the bridge. So I'm going to need some support to be able to cross the bridge, to access my papers so that I can do my taxes. That's one.
I would hope that would work out for you. I can't see why you couldn't go into the city, because my understanding is that the OPS has not been instructed. So the Ottawa Police Service is not checking people who are coming into Ottawa.
Okay.
My understanding is that people who are coming back into Quebec are being checked by Quebec police. And obviously, if you live in Quebec, you should be able to return to your home province unencumbered. So I would hope that you would be able to go across the bridge unencumbered. You'd probably come back. There could be a check. I don't know how they're administering that, but obviously, if you live in the province, you should be entitled to come back unencumbered.
Okay, thank you for that. I was under the understanding that it was a two-way.
No. The mayor made that very clear, along with the police chief. We have better things to do. That's my political comment. But we have better things to do than to have police at a bridge. And in early days too, they were bending over asking you these questions without masks. I understand there was a infected QPP officer at one point as well. It doesn't, to us, it doesn't really make sense. We're not taking that type of approach to enforcement, especially the police service. They're not doing that. So I wouldn't imagine that you should have problems at least getting to your business, getting into your business, getting your paperwork and coming back.
I'm gonna call you. So
well, you've got my number. You know where I am. So
the other thing is that just to answer what Robin was saying. So for me, I'm very fortunate. My landlord, I've been working with my landlord since the beginning of this because I've been closed since March. For those of you who don't know me, I run a dance studio, community dance and wellness. I fall under the rules and regulations of the City of Ottawa recreational facilities. So when things were happening, there's no specific guidelines there were no specific guidelines as to when to close, who to close, but not. I just on my own decided, well, I run like a recreational facility, so I'm going to follow those public health regulations. However, what my concern is that when life resumes to a new normal, the large public recreational facilities and a smaller facility like mine, it's kind of a little unbalanced, right? Because if you compare like a Ray Friel Center, that's a recreational facility, to a studio like mine, so Ray Friel Center that might have 1,000 people going through, and a studio like mine that has 150 to 200 people going through every week, it's kind of apples and oranges. So I'm just hoping that there's going to be some special consideration for when things are put in place, that even though my guideline is the City of Ottawa's recreational facility guideline, that there's a gray zone there. And I'm just hoping that the small businesses like mine who offer the same type of activities will be considered when new rules and regulations will be put in place.
I would imagine so. I mean, when those rules go into place, the good news is a lot of it will be governed by the public health agencies. They will be providing a lot of guidance on how to do things safely, so that we'll be looking towards them. The city has a vested interest. Obviously, we're going to put lives ahead of the economy and ahead of recreation. We've been doing that, so that's very important for the city. However, the city also, the flip side with the city is that it gets a large proportion of its revenue from recreational facilities. So it will be in the interest of the city to reopen those facilities at a certain point. The city will only do that when it is really safe. And we will also get directions from OPH on how to do that, along with other businesses that will open up. And as an example, like I was saying earlier, we were successful with getting community gardens, added as an essential service, with the stipulation that OPH will be providing information and guidelines on sanitation and everything else.
I think I'm more talking about like numbers of people. So for example, I had to cancel my annual production, right, at the Shankman Arts Center. It's a city facility. And my talks with the Shankman Arts Center were, I had to cancel because we didn't know what it was going to look like, whether people had to sit 3 seats apart, 2 seats apart, based on the size of their facility, which is different if you look at a Shankman Arts Center and you look at the NAC, right? So 500 people, 1,200 people. So the rules and regulations for that type of facility, all I'm saying is that I'm just hoping that there is some special consideration.
I'm not going to prejudge what the public health authority would be providing in terms of guidance. What I can say, though, is I would imagine that as we move forward in the future of the crisis, all the things that I've read, gatherings will be smaller. I don't think that we will be seeing large gatherings until we are in a better place, either in terms of infections or if we have some level of proactive treatment, like a vaccine. So my expectation is that if we move forward, it will be on a smaller scale, and that would obviously benefit a service like yours. So I can't, once again, I can't prejudge. I'm not an expert, and we will be doing that in an evidence-based way. But my feeling is that if the economy opens up, it's going to start with the smaller, organizations and services that are providing a smaller scope than a large facility.
Thank you for
Thank
that
you, Suzanne.
reassurance.
I appreciate you. Oh, sorry. Were you saying something? Go ahead.
I just want to say thank you for the reassurance, but I also want to mention that for those that do own a bricks or that run out of a bricks and mortar space, that we all know that there was an announcement that was made by the Prime Minister yesterday about the 75% that you're only that you can talk to your landlord about only paying 25% of your rent instead of trying to do the 10%, like, because it was waived. First, they were saying waiving for 3 months and then repaying 10% over the period of time. Now we're at this other juncture for those who have a bricks and mortar space like mine. And I know for me, it was a huge relief for me because I do occupy a large footprint and in terms of rent and so forth. So for those of you who have not heard that, please talk to your landlord about that subsidy.
Please take advantage of that. And I think it's also important. It's good, as you're saying, keep on watching what the governments are announcing every day. I think the great thing about the federal government response is it is the most comprehensive response out of all the industrialized countries to ensure that we can bridge the gap. This scenario has emerged, but there is going to be programs across the board for businesses. It's important to take a look at what the scope and what the requirements and whether you qualify for those programs are, and to also identify, if those programs aren't benefiting you or you fall out of the scope, please ensure you tell our office, because we are relaying those concerns to the higher levels of government.
Fantastic. Okay, we're going to be moving on to the nonprofit section of the conversation. Ralston, we've been hearing a lot about nonprofit and funding, but again, for our nonprofits in our community, we are at the mercy of the pandemic. We're also wanting to know who is doing what, where, and when. So if you can give a little comment on what you've heard on nonprofits, and then we'll take 1 or 2 questions.
Sure. Well, the good news is that the government has been responding, especially in the vulnerable sector. They did make an investment that will be flowing through the United Ways and other organizations. And some of the inputs on people who want to access some of those dollars will come in at our city level through our Human Needs Task Force that has been established during the duration of this emergency. And we have a direct line as councillors into providing requests and asking inquiries of that Human Needs Task Force. It does not mean that money will be allocated if we have requests, but it does not mean that we cannot make requests. And we have been doing that on behalf of organizations that have had challenges, especially around vulnerable groups, provision of food security issues, isolated seniors, those types of organizations. The city will be receiving monies from the federal government to deal with that. And we've already obtained a portion of dollars to deal with some of these issues, especially around food security, because that is a massive challenge. As some of you might know, in Ward 13, we have some of the highest food bank usage in Ontario. And that usage has actually jumped by 25 to 30% since the beginning of this crisis, because a lot of people have now become more food insecure. So there will be money that will be allocated to municipalities through the federal government. It will be, there is a task force of both city staff and other nonprofit groups that are coming together to discuss the way that monies should be dispensed and where resources should be made. And councillors have been invited to provide inputs on groups that might need dollars. And I have been actively doing that on behalf of groups, whether those are dollars or other types of resources. So I would just say contact our office if you have specific needs or requests, especially around the provision of services that benefit vulnerable groups. And we will be able to talk with you and see if a request is warranted and move requests forward.
Okay, Mr. Dawson, I see you waving your hand. So if you could unmute yourself, or else unmute Mr. Dawson.
I've unmuted.
Okay, so he has a question.
Not for that specific item. I had a question for the previous one.
Oh, on business. Did you want to hold on to it until we go to the Q&A portion? And then we'll be just asking all random questions? Okay.
Sure.
And I'm going to head back to the chat to see who has a question about nonprofits. Specifically as it relates to COVID-19. So I guess somebody's asking what's happening with nonprofit and funding, particularly around COVID-19. I'm assuming that when a nonprofit is looking for funding because of food insecurity or vehicle drop-offs for medication, things like that, who do we go?
So there'll be two mechanisms. So one can be advanced through my office. So you could always contact our office and we can advance it through the Human Needs Task Force. And there will also be a process through, my understanding is United Way. So United Ways would have received monies from the federal government to really address these issues. They already have grant application processes, but I believe that there will be a process that will be specific for COVID-19 that they will be working on. But either channel is a reasonable one to take, whether it's through the city councilor's office to the Human Needs Task Force or directly with United Way.
Okay, Richard Sharp, go ahead. You have a question?
Yes, thank you, Ralston. Just going back to the United Way's role and the city's role, I guess my first quick question, the $350 million emergency response fund for nonprofits, is the city of Ottawa getting money out of that, or is there another pot of money? Because I understand that the United Way and a number of other large organizations like Red Cross are serving as intermediaries. Is the city of Ottawa also getting a chance to serve as kind of like an intermediary as well?
Yes, well, everybody's working together. That's the most important thing. Mm-hmm. So, your inquiry will not get lost. That's the most important thing. If you want to work through the city, we can make the request. It will end up on United Way's desk as well. So it's whatever you feel more comfortable with. I mean, I'm sure that United Way would be probably interested in a process that's a little bit more accessible as well during this crisis. But we've had requests from groups who are looking at enhancing their volunteer network to address food insecurity. Groups who are running kitchens weekly to make meals to provide food to isolated seniors and vulnerable people. And we've been moving requests through to the Human Needs Task Force, who would then allocate it to the table that they sit at, which I believe also includes United Way and other social service groups. So there are two routes, and I invite people, if they feel comfortable, contacting my office to do so, and we will try to advance.
Okay,
we have a great.
Sorry, just to supplement, that's really great. It would be really good to get a sense of what the mechanism is for accessing those kinds of resources through the city. Some of our concerns nationally have been that some of these large organizations that are serving as intermediaries have not historically done a good job of engaging Black communities, especially on the ground. So we think that there's a blind spot there, and we do have some concerns that we've raised with higher levels of government that our people will be left behind, and that the monies that go for $350 million, a lot of that will go to the administration of some of these large organizations. But if the city is part of brokering access for nonprofits, I think that would be fantastic, and it'd be good to know what the mechanism might be for that.
There was the understanding that there needed to be greater coordination, which is why we've established a task force for human needs. And one of the reasons why we established a task force primarily as well for economics. I mean, it's absolutely important. So those are the reasons why we went ahead and did that.
So we have a great comment here from Elaine, and I'll just read it here in the chat. She says, I have been in contact with certain funders. They're indicating due to a shortage of funds, they would prefer a collaboration. The Black community needs to consider coming together to apply for funding together, which is very true in some factions. Yes, we do need to come together as groups that are looking for certain similar things for our nonprofits. Ralston, you want to make one comment about that, and then we're going to move on.
Yeah, I would concur. I'll be very brief on this. In Ward 13, the community associations have actually come together, which is amazing, and I commend them for that. We'll actually have an announcement about that next week, this upcoming week, but they've signed a memorandum of cooperation to say around volunteer networking opportunities, and we are going to work together. And they even teamed up with the Vanier Community Association to do that. So you can imagine they all have signed a document, and it makes it easier for the city to work with one group than with a series of different groups. So I would commend them for doing that, and I would recommend that the community take that approach. It will just be easier for the city to deal with one group than a network of multiple operations.
Fantastic. So we're moving on to the poverty reduction strategy that you have, Ralston. If you can just let the community know quickly about this poverty, because they haven't heard it yet. So it's a good time to release the information.
Sure. Just briefly, that was the major other initiative that I had campaigned on and wanted to really focus on. Was a proposal to take to my colleagues to recommend the reestablishment of a poverty reduction strategy at the city. We don't have one. And we haven't had one in the course of over 10 years, I believe. We have a 10-year homelessness plan that is something that is mandated by statute. And so that's something that we actually have to have, as well as a community well-being plan. But we don't, as a mandate, the city isn't mandated to have a poverty reduction strategy. And a lot of the challenges around both community well-being and homelessness really emanate from this root cause of poverty. And so it was something that we were going to work on before COVID-19 struck as our next major initiative after the Anti-Racism Secretariat. So it's still on the drawing board. It is my intention before the term is out to at least present a proposal to my council colleagues and to others to call for the creation of a poverty reduction strategy that would have to be implemented by our community community protective services committee. So we're not asking really to circumvent. What we wanted to do was work on a proposal, not unlike the proposal that we had for the Secretariat, to say these are the reasons and rationale behind needing a poverty reduction strategy, especially since poverty rates are high in my ward, and we know that the people who are disproportionately affected by poverty are typically racialized and Indigenous people. So it's still our intent to work on that. I would have thought being at home would have given me more time to work on these, but we have so many issues around COVID-19 that we have been responding to that it's been keeping us very busy. But it is our intention to still look at the production of a proposal. And we would appreciate any input that you would have to contribute to that effort.
Wonderful. If folks have any questions or comments they'd like to make, if you can please raise your hand in the chat. Again, it's at the bottom of your screen, or sorry, if you tap on your name, you can raise your hand. Or if you just link me in the chat, I'll be able to see that you have a question. Somebody does have their hand up, which is Elaine. Go ahead. Elaine, you have to go off mute, dear.
Yeah, and I'll unmute.
Okay, perfect.
Okay. Yes, Rosalind, thank you so much for this. Just to follow up on your poverty reduction, I think that we need to have a serious conversation, and I was speaking to Sophie about it, on education, because right now we have kids that are doing, especially our Black youth that are doing online education, and we don't know if they have the proper tools, how this is affecting their education, because without education, then you know that's a very a great factor for poverty. So hopefully, Sophia Ralston, we can have one of these Zoom chats on education, and in particularly online education.
Yeah, I think it will be important. Of course, the city isn't specifically responsible for education. It falls under the purview of the province, and that falls locally under the purview of the school boards. So it would probably be best to look at having a conversation at some point with the people who are either advocating with school boards or working with school boards. And so I've had requests, and I've actually told there is a group called Uniting for Children and Youth, and they are looking at reconstituting. They were very active during the school board trustee elections, which I was involved with in 2018, and they asked me to get involved, and I said, I'll take it under advisement. I am very cognizant of the fact that the school board has its own jurisdiction, the city has its own, but it doesn't mean that there shouldn't be interplay between both. I have had meetings, as you can imagine, with school board officials, especially around issues of racial discrimination, children in school boards who are having challenges around expulsions and suspensions and disciplinary actions. And so I've had those conversations. I want to push for at least having dialogue between the city and all 4 school boards. So I've actually demonstrated my interest in seeing something like that reemerge. One of my colleagues, Councillor Riley Brockington, made me aware that that had occurred in the past, but it doesn't occur right now. And it would be good to see that come back. So I agree with you. I think that we need to have higher level of dialogue, and I'm going to be working within the next several months to really engage in that. But I'm also cognizant of the fact that I sit around the council table and not the school board table. So it's important to have that cross dialogue. But obviously, those concerns should be primarily directed and primarily addressed by our local trustees.
Mr. Dawson, you have a question about this? Oh, yeah, there you go.
I've unmuted it.
I was just wondering, in terms of your proposal, have you had an opportunity to put your thoughts to paper? If so, in order to provide sort of the effective and meaningful input, if you could share that with us?
Yes, so eventually we will. And that was the plan. So the plan was initially we were going to work with Cowie to have a number of community consultations, and then move forward with the creation of a small report. So maybe a 40, 50 page proposal that we would give to our colleagues to really demonstrate the necessity for implementing a poverty reduction strategy. So once again, it would be a proposal coming from a councillor saying that we should have this at the city. That would require action on behalf of Chair Jenna Suds. We'd have to add that to the agenda of city staff. But what we wanted to do is come up with a proposal. Of course, we were just at the beginning of architecting the consultation process. That has been put on hold because we cannot have safe public consultations in a traditional way. However, we are still going to continue work, and we are still going to continue soliciting input from community members. So we just wanted you to be aware that that is something that we are undertaking. At the end of the day, there would be a report that you'd be able to go through and read, and it would be the justification that we would be providing to colleagues to really dedicate some resources to coordinating a poverty response in the city.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Dawson. Ralston, we're going to be moving on to our next topic. I'm going to ask the folks who are on Zoom to just hang on a moment while Ralston says a comment to the people on Facebook, and then we'll move over to our final piece for the Zoom callers.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Sophia. I just wanted to say thank you for all the people who are watching on Facebook. We wanted to simulcast the stream so that there would be maximum accessibility. Coming up to 2 hours on a call is long, but we're going to continue our conversation on Zoom amongst community members. But we want to thank you for joining us, at least on Facebook. And we will resume on the Zoom call later. I just wanted to remind people who are on this call that the next virtual town hall that we will be having is on April 29th at 1 p.m. And you'll be able to tune in to that on my Facebook page at Ralston King, for the government official page, where we will be looking at small business, and we will be holding a small business roundtable. And so we will be able to get into more detail there. But thank you so much for joining us on Facebook. And if you have any more requests, please feel free to go to my website and contact us. The other thing I would suggest that people do as well on the Zoom call is, if you want more information from our office, to go to our website, rideau-rockcliffe.ca. Click on the Contact Us link, and ensure that you sign up for our newsletter so that you can get quality information, both about COVID-19 and also focused on the policy, prescriptive policy approaches and items that we are bringing to City Hall each week.
Perfect. For the